Hello again. Today we've got two stories. One about Tom Kitten and the other one about is it Jemima Puddle Duck, I think. Let's start with the first one. The Tale of Tom Kitten. Once upon a time, there were 3 little kittens, and their names were Mittens, Tom, Kitten and Moppet. They had dear little fur coats of their own, and they tumbled about the doorstep and played in the dust. So they were used to getting quite dirty and mucked up. Oh, hang on. There we are, look. They're playing, look. Having a lovely time. But one day, their mother, Mrs. Tabitha Twitchit, expected friends to tea. So she fetched the kittens indoors to wash and dress them before the fine company arrived. Ooh, but they didn't like that. First, she scrubbed their faces. This one is Moppet. Then she brushed their fur. This one is Mittens. Then she combed their tails and whiskers. This is Tom Kitten. Tom was very naughty and he scratched another naughty one. Mrs. Tabitha dressed Moppet and Mittens in clean pinafores and tuckers, and then she took all sorts of elegant, uncomfortable clothes out of the chest of drawers in order to dress up her son Thomas. Now, if you don't know, Tom is a short way of saying Thomas. So that was Tom Kitten. He was really Thomas Kitten. Tom Kitten was very fat, and he had grown. Several buttons burst off. His mother sewed them on again. Oh dear, he doesn't look very comfortable in that, does he? When the 3 little kittens were ready, Mrs. Tabitha unwisely turned them out into the garden to be out of the way while she made hot buttered toast. Don't think that was a good idea. Now keep your frocks clean, children. You must walk on your hind legs. Keep away from the dirty ash pit, and from Sally Hennypenny, and from the cat pigsty, and the puddle ducks. So they look a bit strange walking on hind legs, don't they? Moppet and Mittens walked down the garden path unsteadily. Presently they trod upon their pinafores and fell on their noses. When they stood up, there were several green smears, so there were green marks on their dresses. Oh, dear me. Let us climb up the rockery and sit on the garden wall, said Moppet. They turned their pinafores back to front and went with a skip and a jump. Moppet's white tucker fell down into the road. Dear me, they've gone on to the... Tom Kitten was quite unable to jump when walking upon his hind legs in trousers. He came to the rockery by degrees, breaking the ferns and shedding buttons right and left. He was all in pieces when he reached the top of the wall. Dear me. Moppet and Mittens tried to pull him together. His hat fell off and the rest of his buttons burst. Oh, goodness gracious. What a mess. While they were in difficulties, there was a pit-pat, paddle-pat, and the 3 puddle ducks came along the hard high road, marching one behind the other, and doing the goose step, pit-pat, paddle-pat, pit-pat, waddle-pat. There they are. Can you see the ducks there? They stopped and stood in a row and stared up at the kittens. They had very small eyes and looked surprised. Then the two duck birds, Rebecca and Jemima Puddle Duck, picked up the hat and took her and put them on. Mittens laughed so that she fell off the wall. Moppet and Tom descended after her, so they got down after her. The pinafores and all the rest of Tom's clothes came off on the way down. Oh, goodness me. "Come, Mr. Drake Puddle Duck," said Moppet. "Come and help us to dress him. Come and button up Tom." Mr. Drake Puddle Duck advanced in a slow sideways manner, so he came forward in a sideways manner and picked up various articles. So he picked up various bits of the clothes, look. There he is. But he put them on himself. They fitted him even worse than Tom Kitten. "It's a very fine morning," said Mr. Drake Puddle Duck. And he and Jemima and Rebecca Puddle Duck set off up the road, keeping step. Pit-pat, paddle-pat, pit-pat, waddle-pat. Then Tabitha Twitchit came down the garden and found her kittens on the wall with no clothes on. Oh, my goodness me. She pulled them off the wall and smacked them and took them back to the house. Oh, look, she smacked their bottoms. She was so cross with them. "My friends will arrive in a minute, and you are not fit to be seen. I am affronted," said Mrs. Tabitha Twitchit. She sent them upstairs. I am sorry to say she told her friends that they were in bed with the measles, which was not true. Look, there's her friends arriving. She told a little lie, didn't she? Quite the contrary. They were not in bed, not in the least. Somehow there were very extraordinary noises overhead, which disturbed the dignity and repose of the tea party. Oh, can you see what they were doing? They were very mischievous kittens, weren't they? And I think that someday I shall have to make another larger book to tell you more about Tom Kitten. As for the Puddle Ducks, they went into a pond. The clothes all came off directly. Straight away the clothes came off because there were no buttons. And Mr. Drake Puddle Duck and Jemima and Rebecca have been looking for them ever since. The end. So the next story is actually the tale of Jemima Puddle Duck. We mentioned her in the last story, didn't we? And there she is, a picture of her, look. The tale of Jemima Puddle Duck. What a funny sight it is to see a brood of ducklings with a hen. Listen to the story of Jemima Puddle Duck, who was annoyed, that means she was cross, because the farmer's wife would not let her hatch her own eggs. So it sounds to me like the hen had hatched the eggs, the duck's egg. That doesn't seem right, does it? Her sister-in-law, Mrs. Rebecca Puddle Duck, was perfectly willing to leave the hatching to someone else. Oh, I have not the patience to sit on a nest for 28 days. And no more have you, Jemima. You would let them go cold, and you know you would. I wish to hatch my own eggs. I will hatch them all by myself, quacked Jemima Puddle Duck. She tried to hide her eggs, but they were always found and carried off. Jemima Puddle Duck became quite desperate. She determined to make a nest right away from the farm, so she decided that she was going to go right away from the farm to make her nest. She set off on a fine spring afternoon along the cart road that leads over the hill. She was wearing a shawl and a poke bonnet. When she reached the top of the hill, she saw a wood in the distance. She thought that it looked a safe, quiet spot. Jemima Puddle Duck was not much in the habit of flying. She ran downhill a few yards flapping her shawl, and then she jumped off into the air. Oh, so she decided she was going to give it a try at flying. She flew beautifully when she had got a good start. She skimmed along over the treetops until she saw an open place in the middle of the wood where the trees and brushwood had been cleared. Jemima alighted rather heavily, so she came down quite heavily and began to waddle about in search of a convenient dry nesting place. She rather fancied a tree stump among some tall foxgloves. But seated upon the stump, she was startled to find an elegantly dressed gentleman reading a newspaper. He had black prick ears and sandy-coloured whiskers. "What?" said Jemima Puddle Duck, with her head and her bonnet on one side. "What?" The gentleman raised his eyes above his newspaper and looked curiously at Jemima. "Madam, have you lost your way?" said he. He had a long bushy tail which he was sitting upon, as the stump was somewhat damp. Jemima thought him mightily civil and handsome. She explained that she had not lost her way, but that she was trying to find a convenient dry nesting place. Now have a look at this gentleman. Wonder what he is. "Ah, is that so indeed?" said the gentleman with sandy whiskers, looking curiously at Jemima. He folded up the newspaper and put it in his coat-tail pocket. Jemima complained of the superfluous hen. She was complaining about the hen who had hatched her eggs. "Indeed, how interesting! I wish I could meet with that fowl. I would teach it to mind its own business." "But as to a nest, there is no difficulty. I have a sack full of feathers in my woodshed. No, my dear madam, you will be in nobody's way. You may sit there as long as you like," said the bushy, long-tailed gentleman. He led the way to a very retired, dismal-looking house amongst the foxgloves. It was built of faggots, which are little sticks, and turf, and there were two broken pails, one on top of another, by way of a chimney. So there you can see the house. "This is my summer residence. You would not find my winter house, so convenient," said the hospitable gentleman. There was a tumble-down shed at the back of the house, made of old soap boxes. The gentleman opened the door and showed Jemima in. He looks a bit cunning to me. The shed was almost quite full of feathers. It was almost suffocating, but it was comfortable and very soft. Jemima Puddle Duck was rather surprised to find such a vast quantity of feathers, but it was very comfortable, and she made a nest without any trouble at all. When she came out, the sandy-whiskered gentleman was sitting on a log reading the newspaper. At least he had it spread out, but he was looking over the top of it. He was so polite that he seemed almost sorry to let Jemima go home for the night. He promised to take great care of her nest until she came back again next day. He said he loved eggs and ducklings. He should be proud to see a fine nestful in his woodshed. Jemima Puddle Duck came every afternoon. She laid 9 eggs in the nest. They were greeny white and very large. The foxy gentleman admired them immensely. He used to turn them over and count them when Jemima was not there. At last Jemima told him that she intended to begin to sit next day. "And I will bring a bag of corn with me, so that I need never leave my nest until the eggs are hatched. They might catch cold," said the conscientious Jemima. She was a very good duckling, wasn't she? Wanting to hatch her eggs. "Madam, I beg you not to trouble yourself with a bag. I will provide oats. But before you commence your tedious sitting, before you start sitting, I intend to give you a treat. Let us have a dinner party all to ourselves. May I ask you to bring up some herbs from the farm garden to make a savoury omelette? Sage and thyme and mint and 2 onions and some parsley. I will provide lard for the omelette," said the hospitable gentleman with sandy whiskers. Oh, what do you think he was intending to do? I'm not sure. Jemima Puddle Duck was a simpleton. Not even the mention of sage and onions made her suspicious. She went round the farm garden, nibbling off snippets of all the different sorts of herbs that were used for stuffing roast duck. Oh! And she waddled into the kitchen and got 2 onions out of a basket. The collie dog Kep met her coming out. "What are you doing with those onions? Where'd you go every afternoon by yourself, Jemima Puddle Duck?" Jemima was rather in awe of the collie. She told him the whole story. The collie listened with his wise head on one side. He grinned when she described the polite gentleman with sandy whiskers. So there's the collie dog Kep. He looks a nice dog, doesn't he? And Jemima's telling him the story. He asked several questions about the wood and about the exact position of the house and shed. Then he went out and trotted down the village. He went to look for 2 foxhound puppies who were out at walk with the butcher. So there he is going into the village. Jemima Puddle Duck went up the cart road for the last time on a Sunday afternoon. She was rather burdened with bunches of herbs and 2 onions in a bag. She flew over the wood and alighted opposite the house of the bushy, long-tailed gentleman. He was sitting on a log. He sniffed the air and kept glancing uneasily around the wood. When Jemima alighted, he quite jumped. "Come into the house as soon as you have looked at your eggs. Give me the herbs for the omelette. Be sharp." He was rather abrupt, rather sharp with her. Jemima Puddle Duck had never heard him speak like that. She felt surprised and uncomfortable. While she was inside, she heard pattering feet round the back of the shed. Someone with a black nose sniffed at the bottom of the door and then locked it. Jemima became much alarmed. Look who'd come. A moment afterwards there were the most awful noises, barking, baying, growls and howls, squealing and groans, and nothing more was ever seen of that foxy whiskered gentleman. Presently Kep opened the door of the shed and let out Jemima Puddle Duck. Unfortunately, the puppies rushed in and gobbled up all the eggs before he could stop them. He had a bite on his ear and both the puppies were limping. Oh dear. Jemima Puddle Duck was escorted home in tears on account of those eggs. Oh, poor Jemima, she still didn't hatch her own eggs, did she? Dear me. She laid some more in June, and she was permitted to keep them herself, but only 4 of them hatched. Jemima Puddle Duck said that it was because of her nerves, but she had always been the egg. And there's a picture of her with her 4 little ducklings. So that's the end of our story today. Bye now. See you again soon.